duties of the
We're talking
office
about
of
Section
acting
4.
president. So the vice president and the cabinet can remove the president if they have a written declaration that in fact the president can't discharge his duties. If the president has a psychological issue, if the president has a substance abuse issue, if the president's child is actually kidnapped by terrorists and they're threatening to kill the child, the vice president can say, you're thinking about your family or these other issues more than you're thinking about the country. We're going to take over for a while until you can get things sorted out. This has not ever been done. But understand, it's lurking there, and they're doing this to kind of try and protect the country. I think I'd mentioned to you Air Force One as an example of this, because they tried to do this to Harrison Ford and Air Force One. Ultimately, however, they did not. What other questions have y'all got? Looking at the articles, what is the number one attribute that people really want in a president? Courage is number one. And who, according to that Gallup poll, were the top 5 presidents in American history? Lincoln was 1. Reagan was 2. Kennedy was 3. Clinton was 4, and FDR was 5. And we talked about some of the problems with that. Born in the USA. Why is it that the founding fathers wanted to make sure the president was born in the United States?
Smart.
No conflict of interest. Why else? Why else was it important that the president was born in the United States at the beginning of the country?
Because they were fighting the English and they don't want a French president taking over.
There was a sense that our institutions were so weak that if there was somebody that was biased toward France or biased in favor of England, that they could actually help those other countries come in and take over the United States. And so they set it up so that you had to be a natural-born citizen. What were some of the arguments in favor of allowing foreign-born people to become president of the United States?
Should be the most qualified.
Some people would argue we should have the most qualified person rather than just somebody born in the United States. What else? Some people would argue that the largest minority group in the United States is now Hispanic. A lot of those folks were not necessarily born here, but because of the changing demographics of the country, maybe we should make sure that they have the ability. Some folks had argued in this, it had listed the numbers in terms of the Latino or Hispanic elected officials. Do you remember what those numbers were? Oh. There were like over 4,000 that had served, ranging from the United States Congress down to state and local offices. And the argument was that if they could serve in those offices, then maybe they should be allowed to also serve as the presidency. I mean, take a look at that article. I don't know if we talked about it specifically, but there was an amendment that they had proposed too. And we might not have talked about this, but in the article it said you still had to have a 14-year residency to be president, obviously. But they said that if you were a citizen for 20 years, even if you were not born here, you could amend the Constitution and then run, again, even if you were not necessarily born here. What other questions have you got? Pardons. What was the deal with pardons? Okay, the president's allowed to pardon people. What does that mean?
That means like if somebody's charged for something, he can pardon.
What's the one exception?
Until he gets impeached.
Impeachment is the one exception. And the idea is that the president cannot pardon impeachment because that would raise Article 2, the president, above Article 1, the Congress, and that's not what they intended. With Nixon, a lot of people think it was Nixon, and I heard you say before, it wasn't Nixon that was impeached. He wasn't. He was resigned, and then he was pardoned. And he was pardoned before Congress started impeachment, which meant what? Is that legal?
It's legal.
It is legal because they had not started it yet. But if they had started the impeachment process, then you could not actually pardon someone at that point because you're raising Article 2 above Article 1. That's what that was. What was the story with the president's children?
Yeah, I don't think we cut to that one.
I think we got to that one.
Is that the one where, like, if the president's children are in war,
that
you
one.
should
Okay.
kill yourself before?
What president specifically said this to his son?
Eisenhower?
It was Eisenhower. Eisenhower was the one that said, you know, his son was active duty. Of course, Eisenhower was the general. And Eisenhower didn't want him to be serving while he was president for fear that another country could get him and then ultimately barter the child for some policy changes for the United States. And Eisenhower told his son, under no circumstances do you need to be taken alive. So basically he's telling him to kill himself if he ever got to the point where he was going to be captured by serving in active duty. Some people would say the president's child should serve in active duty just like everybody else's children. Others would say, no, the president's child is too important, not because of the wonders of the president, but because of the office of the presidency. And that was what that was. And then do you remember the signing statements? Billy, I think you had that article.
The president can put a statement of his opinion on the bill.
The president can offer a signing statement on a bill. And the idea behind the signing statement is that if the president wants all of the bill but maybe not one part, the president can issue a signing statement basically saying, I'm not going to enforce that. And the trick on this is that it's got to be within the president's Article 2 powers. And Commander-in-Chief is typically an example of this. The specific bill was a torture bill. Torture ban, and George W. signed it, and he said effectively, you know what, I reserve the right not to enforce a torture ban. So he's basically saying, Congress said I can't torture, but I think I can under my Article 2 powers. And that seems controversial. Do you remember anything about Bush and signing statements?
He signed over 400 something in a year.
He signed more than all of the other American presidents in history combined. And at the time of the article, when you look at this, and I'll go ahead and pull this up to get the exact number, it says up here that Bush had issued 807 challenges to over 100 bills. And the date on this was August of 2006. So basically, in almost his first 6 years in office, he issued about 2.5 signing statements every week. 5 signing statements every 2 weeks, however you want to look at it. So he had done more than just about, than all of the other American presidents combined. Going back into the chapter, any other questions about terms?
Presidential doctrine?
Don't worry about presidential doctrine.
Okay.
Don't worry about that. Let's take a look at the judiciary really quick, because the judiciary is the last one. And as you look at this, it's a little bit smaller, but you know, it's got some stuff in there. As you scroll, actually, there's a lot of stuff. Wow. Any questions about any of the terms? There's a lot of terms from judiciary.
Standing?
What was standing?
You have to have suffered some sort of injury so you can sue.
Yeah, that's right. In order to sue, you have to have standing, or you've got to have suffered some form of an injury, basically. And do you remember the example that I'd given you where somebody sued that they didn't have standing?
Girls pregnant? Oh no, girls trying to get birth control?
Oh no,
Close.
wasn't it with abortion?
Was not with abortion. It was talking about suing to end the Vietnam War. And they sued because of their taxpayer standing. Their tax dollars were being wasted, so that was the violation, and the court didn't buy it. Mootness and ripeness. What's the difference between mootness and ripeness?
Moot is where the issue has been resolved.
If the issue has been resolved before you get to court. Can you think of some examples of mootness? Because I gave you 2.
Abortion.
Abortion was this one, because she had the baby. She was suing for abortion, but she had the baby before she got to court. And the Texas people said, oh, that's a moot case. You don't need to hear this. And the Supreme Court took a look at it, and they said, well, wait a minute. It's going to take longer to get to the Supreme Court than to have a baby. It would be ridiculous for her to try and hold the baby that long. It would be ridiculous for her to have to get pregnant again, which means she's being denied legal treatment, legal protection. So they said that there were millions of other similarly situated or similarly pregnant women at the time. What was ripeness?
Eating a green banana.
Eating a green banana. And I think somebody liked to eat green bananas. Yeah. Okay, you two did. Okay, yeah. All right, so question. What was the example from ripeness?
Contraceptives.
What's that?
Contraceptives?
Contraceptives. Yeah, birth control. You're on it today, Wood. I mean, not on contraceptives, but yeah, you're on top of things today. All right, what was the deal? I mean, if a case is not yet ripe, what has not happened?
It's not really blown up into a major argument yet.
Hadn't really blown up into a case or a controversy. You haven't really suffered the issue. What was the story in that contraceptives case?
Apparently, a woman needed contraceptives because if she gets pregnant, she may die.
That's right. And so how did she try and challenge the state law?
Well, she brought a police officer in.
Okay.
The doctor issued the contraceptives. They both got arrested. And
Yeah, now that was the last one. In the first case, she sued because she said she'd die if she got pregnant. And the court said, you haven't suffered an injury yet. And then she brought the doctor in, and the doctor sued because he said he might lose patients. You know, this would hurt his his medicinal practice. And they said, you haven't suffered an injury yet. So they brought in a police officer. The police officer arrested them. And then they now had suffered a real injury, and the Supreme Court struck down the law. So yeah, that's what that one was. Any other questions?
Writ of certiorari.
What's the writ of certiorari? This is one of the factors that the Supreme Court typically uses to get jurisdiction, or not jurisdiction, but to accept cases. So somebody would have to, and it could be a team of attorneys, or it could be somebody with a notepad and number 2 pencils. They write an argument as far as why their case should be heard, and typically the Supreme Court gives or selects cases from the reading of writs of certiorari. Yeah. What else have you got?
Tie.
If there's a tie in the Supreme Court, what's the ruling?
The Chief
The
Justice.
highest court decision.
The highest lower court decision is now the statement of law. So the Supreme Court can't, it's tied, somebody has stepped away, the highest lower court is going to be the decision, and then usually there is a case that follows that case that will try and get back to the Supreme Court so they can make an official ruling. What else?
Solicitor General.
Who's the Solicitor General?
The one who argues America's point in the Supreme Court.
The one that argues for the United States government in the Supreme Court. Do you remember the nickname of the Solicitor General? Considered as the 10th justice on the Supreme Court. And the idea is that no, it's not really a Supreme Court justice, but since you're arguing for the government, the Supreme Court views them as basically on their team. What's difficult about the Solicitor General's job is they've got to push the president's agenda on the one hand, but on the other hand, they've also got to not push too hard to basically lose their credibility with the court. So if you don't push too hard, you get fired by the president. If you push too hard and lose credibility, you get fired by the president. So you're really trying to serve a couple of masters. But this is the person that argues for the United States government before the Supreme Court. Any other questions?
Falwell and Flint.
What was Falwell versus Flint?
Isn't that the Hustler magazine?
That was the Hustler magazine case.
He was proving that his case was under the First Amendment, right? Oh no, it's not. It's when he wrote about the pastor.
Campari.
Yeah, talking about him having his first time being with his mom in the outhouse and stuff like that.
Yeah, the ad said Jerry Falwell, the preacher, the religious figure. Jerry Falwell talks about his first time. And I saw you do the thing with your fingers. First time typically means sex. Well, first time actually meant the first time he took a drink of Campari liquor, right? And where was this first time?
In an outhouse somewhere in rural Virginia.
In an outhouse in rural Virginia after they kicked out a goat. Well, they had a picture of Falwell, right? And what else?
And a line that said the parody is.
Well, they had an interview.
Yeah.
Was any of it true?
No, it says the parody is not to be used as.
Not to get seriously.
Add parody, not to be taken seriously, and it was in really small font. Flint, if you remember, Falwell, if you remember, sued. And he sued because none of this was true. This could ruin his reputation. I mean, he's a pastor having sex with his mother in an outhouse after they kicked out a goat. I mean, that doesn't sound like a very, very positive thing. But Flint put on there, add parody not to be taken seriously. And his argument was no reasonable person would really think that this is true because it was labeled on the ad. Where else was it labeled?
9-page spread.
There was a special parody section in the magazine so that every part of those pages was actually parody. So it was labeled on the individual page and in that section of the magazine. What'd the court say?
You can do it if you say it's a parody.
Okay, you can do it if you say it's a parody. Well, then that leaves it open to interpretation, now doesn't it?
He's famous, so he could do it, but,
I have to accept the good with the bad.
Yeah, if you're a public figure, you have to accept the good with the bad. And they basically said that this was just a joke. It's just like political cartoons in the newspaper, or what Letterman or Leno, or in the old days, Johnny Carson would do at the beginning of their shows. They make jokes. And in this instance, they said if you're a public figure, you're going to have the wealth, you're going to have the notoriety, but you're also going to be open to criticism.